What's up, guys? Nathan here. Path of Exile is a complicated game. To really get a solid understanding of it, you'll have to research items, builds, and enemies. But just when you think you've started to get a handle on things, a fat NPC will appear offering to sell you a headhunter in exchange for a currency you don't have. Or maybe a green ghost possesses a red beast, causing you to get one shot. Or maybe an immortal blue alien with gibberish as his name starts spawning weird mobs you've never seen before. And then, almost instantly, the game no longer makes sense. In short, all of these occurrences are called league mechanics. At one point or another, they were the focal points of entire 3-month game cycles, much like Synthesis. The good news is that each of these 23 mechanics are still in the game, although at varying capacities, which means there is an obscenely high amount of content for players to interact with. The bad news is this also means new players have a lot to learn. So, I've decided to make a multi part series where I talk about each and every league mechanic in Path of Exile. This includes some light history and information about each mechanic, as well as everything you need to know to interact with it in its current form. The first couple videos will cover multiple simpler mechanics, such as Anarchy, Domination, and Invasion, whereas later videos in the series will specifically focus on the more complicated ones, such as Delve and Betrayal. So, without further ado, let's jump into part 1. Anarchy, Onslaught, Domination, and Nemesis. To start things off, let's talk about Anarchy League. Anarchy was one of the first challenge leagues ever released by GGG, and mechanics aside, it introduced an impressive array of meta-defining items, including Diamond Rings, Vol's Devotion, and the notorious Eternal Orb. Eternal Orbs were an extremely powerful currency that let you create an imprint of any item ready to be restored at a later point in time. This effectively allowed you to YOLO craft on items without too much risk and were therefore a staple of endgame crafting. Eternal Orbs would go on to be removed from the game in 2015, but you can still engage with a similar mechanic via beast crafting, which allows you to create imprints of magic items. However, as impactful as Eternal Orbs were during their heyday, understanding exactly how they worked isn't something you need to know. What you do need to know about Anarchy is the League mechanic that came with it. The League mechanic introduced was a new enemy type called Rogue Exiles. Rogue Exiles are basically NPCs with access to the same classes, skills, and gear as players. They use predetermined builds, and there are 4 variants for each class. For example, you may encounter Igna Phoenix, a witch using Righteous Fire and spamming fireballs. Or maybe Xandro Blooddrinker, a marauder who uses Ground Slam and curses you with vulnerability. Another side note is that these rogue exiles will also use microtransactions, meaning it's fairly easy to make your own character look like them if you want to spend a few extra bucks. In modern Path of Exile, rogue exiles are fairly easy to deal with. Their life pools and damage numbers will rarely pose a noticeable challenge to a good build, so it's recommended to just kill them and move on. The rewards for killing a rogue exile is a decent amount of loot as well as guaranteed drops for every inventory slot. I've also noticed they tend to drop jewels more often than other enemies, but I couldn't find any factual information to support this personal hypothesis. Rogue exiles can be found in a variety of different places, including random spawns, sextant mods, occasionally as map device mods, and as strongbox mods. Because they present such lackluster rewards, I can't recommend actively attempting to engage with or farm rogue exiles, but if you do run into one, there's no reason not to kill it and hope for a lucky drop. Running parallel to Anarchy was Onslaught, GGG's first hardcore challenge league. Rather than having to deal with rogue exiles, Onslaught players had to deal with a version of Path of Exile where all areas had the following modifiers: 20% increased monster movement speed, 20% increased monster attack speed, and 20% increased monster cast speed. As you can imagine, this was meant to present an additional challenge to hardcore players at the time. I personally was not playing the game back then, but I imagine these mods made for an overall more dangerous gameplay experience. Today, Onslaught is still alive and well, but rather than being universally present on all monsters, it is instead considered a buff that can be acquired in numerous ways. These include the Onslaught Support Gem, a Silver Flask, various on-kill effects from the passive tree and abyss jewels, over a dozen different unique items, and most recently, a permanent implicit that can be synthesized onto boots. In terms of how to engage with this mechanic, I'd say its importance varies on a build by build basis. For example, a traditional zombie necromancer might find it relatively unimportant, but a Blade Vortex Pathfinder might go out of their way to fit it in. Regardless of whether or not you choose to include Onslaught in your build, it's important to know what it is so you can recognize its benefits for players and be wary of monsters that use it against you. Continuing with this trend of simplistic leagues, we have Domination. Again, this league introduced key meta defining items such as two stone rings, the Taming Trio, and the Jade Flask base type, which is found in many Queen of the Forest builds today. As for the league mechanic, this is where things start to get interesting. All areas in Domination contained shrines, which provided powerful buffs to all the monsters in a medium sized area around them. The catch is rather than immediately killing these abnormally strong monsters, players could choose to walk up to the shrine, click it, and claim the powerful buff for themselves for the next 45 seconds. Since shrines are so prominent in the base game, you probably recognize some of their effects. The strongest and most impactful of them include Acceleration, which increases action speed by 50%, Diamond, which makes all hits critical, Echoing, which grants 100% more attack and cast speed, as well as causing your skills to repeat themselves. Massive, which significantly increases your area of effect, maximum life, and character size. And Divine, which prevents you from taking damage. In their current forms, shrines are very simple and easy to interact with. They have a random chance to spawn in almost any area in the game, and GGG occasionally makes them available as guaranteed spawns via the map device. If you run into one, all you need to do is kill the mobs surrounding it, click the shrine to take the buff, then be on your way. Sometimes, if the buff is useless to you, such as the resistance or skeletal buffs, it can be unnecessary to click the shrine at all. Probably the most impactful aspect of Domination you should know about is this unique item, the Goal. The Goal is a fun item that creates lesser shrines every time you kill an enemy every 20 seconds. Because it can create lesser acceleration, brutal, and massive shrines, it can be a reasonable boost to clear speed, but since you still have to click the shrines to activate them, it's more of a fun personal choice than anything else. All things considered, Nemesis League probably contained the most impactful content of any league talked about in this video. It was responsible for introducing dangerous monster modifiers that still regularly kill hardcore players today, as well as the most iconic unique item in the game, Headhunter. On the surface, the league mechanic behind Nemesis was fairly simple. All areas in the game simply read, rare monsters each have a Nemesis mod. However, there were over a dozen of these different mods, ranging from barely noticeable to downright deadly. Today, Nemesis mods are still around, and they've actually been updated to be even more impactful. I'll be putting up a comprehensive list on the screen for you to pause and look through, but I also want to take the time to draw attention to a few of the more dangerous ones. Corrupting Blood. Depending on the build you are playing, this mod can be devastating. Every time you hit an enemy with this mod, you'll gain the Corrupting Blood debuff, which can stack up to 20 times. This acts as a powerful damage over time effect, and at max stacks, Corrupting Blood can kill squishier builds in less than a second. So for skills that hit fast and often, such as Winter Orb or Blade Vortex, be ready to pop an anti-bleed flask or use a jewel with the Corrupted Blood immunity Corruption. Final Grasp. Though not especially dangerous, I'd argue this mod is more noticeable than most. Upon killing an enemy with this mod, it will leave behind a shadowy apparition of itself that fires off a nova of dark projectiles. While it's easy enough to just walk away, be careful if you find yourself looting near it or unable to move away for whatever reason. Inferno Bolt. I'm only mentioning this mod because it's extremely noticeable and probably rippy. As you engage an enemy with this mod, it will begin to charge up a fiery projectile. It takes a couple of seconds to charge, and when it fires, it does so in a straight line. I've never died to this mod, but it can do considerable damage, so make sure to move out of the way or kill the monster in question as quickly as possible. Lightning Mirage. This mod is one of the more recent and deadly ones added by GGG. A monster with this mod will constantly create electric-looking clones of the player, which will slowly but surely chase after you. They are reasonably easy to avoid and detonate on their own after a while, but can be extremely rippy if you manage to get hit by too many of them in quick succession. Nullifier. This is an interesting mod because for some builds, its effect is literally non existent, whereas for others, it can spell instant death. Enemies with this mod remove all charge and flask effects upon hitting the player. If you are a build that heavily relies on endurance charges for survivability, such as Righteous Fire Juggernaut, be extra careful around monsters with this mod. Soul Eater. This mod isn't quite as dangerous as it looks, but it's certainly an imposing sight to behold. A monster with Soul Eater will gain increased damage, defenses, and size the more monsters you kill around it. Luckily, in today's meta of speed clearing maps with absurdly high damage, these beefed up monsters rarely get a chance to hit you, but they can still lead to some surprising one shots if you aren't careful. Vine Snare. Similar to Corrupting Blood, albeit far less dangerous, is Vine Snare. Every time you hit an enemy with this mod, you'll gain a stacking debuff that reduces your movement speed, and only moving around will start to remove it. This mod does no damage on its own, but the slowing effect can be pretty extreme if you let it stack up, which can in turn leave you open to other enemies. Volatile Flame Blood. Last but not least, we have the infamous Volatiles. When an enemy with this mod dies, a dangerous ball of death spawns and proceeds to chase down the player. When it makes contact with said player, it briefly pauses, then explodes, dealing damage equal to the total attack damage of its source monster, which means it can easily one-shot you if it came from a rippy enough enemy. The best way to avoid volatiles is to run straight into them, then quickly dart away after making contact, since they have to play out an animation before they can explode. There are, of course, a huge number of other Nemesis mods, but I think these were the most important ones, so as long as you learn to recognize and avoid their warning signs, you should be good to go. Last, but certainly not least, I want to touch on the iconic unique I mentioned earlier, Headhunter. In case you don't know about Headhunter, it's an item that lets you steal the mods of rare enemies you kill for 20 seconds. As good as this sounds, it's really hard to visualize how insane this is without seeing it for yourself, so I'll put up some footage here. Yeah, it's pretty good. Because of this effect, Headhunter is considered not only one of the most fun items in the game, but also one of the best ways to increase overall map clear speed. Consequently, it's also the most expensive unique in the game, usually going for anywhere from 40 to 60 exalts. The catch is you can't actually acquire a headhunter via normal means. It's considered a league specific item, meaning that it can't just drop while mapping like any other unique. Luckily, there are still a number of ways you can get yourself one, so here's a non exhaustive list of how to do so. Raid a syndicate safe house with Chimeria in transportation. Use Orbs of Chance on leather belts while in a map with the Nemesis map device mod. Do the Create a Unique Belt Bestiary recipe. Sacrifice belts at the Altar of Corruption room in the Temple of Atsuatl. Farm the Doctor Divination cards in Burial Chambers maps, and probably a few more. It should be noted that the chance to obtain Headhunter through these methods is extremely low and will likely take hundreds, if not thousands, of attempts before you are met with success. But then again, there's a reason why it costs as much as it does. Anyway, this brings us to the end of the first part of my series on past Path of Exile leagues and how to interact with them. If you have any questions or corrections, don't hesitate to post a comment below, and I'll pin it if necessary. Thanks for watching, this has been Nathan, and I hope you have a fantastic rest of your day.
Thank you!
What's up, guys? Now time for the part of the video where I thank my Patreon supporters. I also have a couple of announcements, so just stick around for a little longer. But first, I want to thank Real Human, Pete, Zikarak, Squally, Zoljan, Coda, Julia, Allen, and the newest member of the family, Keplerk. Thank you guys so much. You make what I do possible more than you know. Or maybe you do know, because my first announcement is I actually am going full-time YouTube here. In about a couple weeks, I'm going to be subsisting on the ad revenue, the Patreon revenue, and doing some freelance video work for an old friend from high school. Either way, full-time YouTube is super exciting for me. I can finally quit my day job. And second announcement is I actually just hit 10,000 subscribers. So I think some kind of subscriber special is in order, maybe. If that's something you guys are interested in, post ideas below so I can maybe come up with something. Or if you just want to do like a Q&A, which is what I think most people do around this subscriber mark, is just post your questions below. So yeah, that would be awesome. Anyway, check me out on Patreon, join the Discord, and all that jazz. Thank you. Have a great rest of your day.